All right, let's get into bass guitar, guitars, acoustics, all those wonderful instruments. So, first things first, bass guitar. I put this right up and next to in the drum kit in that the drums and bass need to be locked in together as they would be on stage in your mix as well. So, let's listen to what our bass sounds like first before we go into anything else. Okay, so let's talk about what we just heard. So that bass guitar is a jazz bass running into a Aguilar tone hammer into a Ready DI, which is a tube DI. So we've already got a great sound source to start with here. This is just a DI signal, no amp or anything. So what are we going to do to make this sound even better? Well, honestly, EQ is not going to do much because it already sounds good. I did do a little bit. I actually took a high pass filter at 20 hertz, which you've heard me say already. I like to do just because I want to make sure that there's none of that information going into my subs. And then I have two dips here. I've got one at 2K and one at 6K. And those are roughly just to cut out some of the bite from the pick attack that I felt was needed in this mix context. So let's take a listen. Really don't need to do anything else. We're lucky we had a great source tone to work with. Now, in an instance where the source tone's not good, say maybe there's no top end in there. Well, there's two things. You can either try and add it back in, but if it's not even coming to you, like if you've got a bass player who rolled off all their top end because they want to do just the sub information, that's when you need to talk with your where you need to talk with your bass player and say, hey, I'd like to hear a little bit more of the attack or a little bit more of the strings of your guitar and less of the sub, because I want to be able to hear your notes actually come through a little bit. So can you give me that back with your tone controls? And if they do, great. If they don't, well, work with what you got and see how you can make it better. Another way you could maybe need to adjust your bass tone is maybe there's a little bit too much low end. I know that happens here with some of my bass players. So a lot of times then I'm gravitating towards looking at what my RTA says in terms of what frequency ranges seem to be the loudest. And I'll start kind of pinpointing them with that frequency finding technique I taught you back in the last section. And I'll start listening to those spots. And if I find a note or a resonant area that seems to be kind of overtaking, I'll duck that down 3 to 6 dB depending on what sounds best. But moving on with this one already sounded great. So we're going to move on to the only other thing that I'm going to do to this guitar, or to this bass guitar, is compress it just a little bit. So let's pull up our compressor and take a listen. Now, this compressor here is an Opto style compressor. Ones that you may be familiar with or may have seen in the past is going to be the LA2A, which is a very famous compressor from way back in the day. Now, that one is a great compressor for things like vocals, guitars, bass guitar. Some people even like to use them on some of the drum parts. I personally like to use it on guitars and bass just because it seems to have a nice little bit of a warm tube sound to it, and it doesn't seem to be too aggressive and too bitey. So in this instance here, we're only doing about 3 dB of compression here. It's very mild. We're doing a 3-to-1 ratio because we have a ratio control here that's variable. We've got the attack and recovery, which is the release settings. We've got them set to a medium and fast, so that way we can not grab the initial attack all the way. We can let some of it come through, but then we release very fast so we can hear that note sing and come out. Now, don't ask me about those two other options, say transient burn, because even the manuals for this board don't say what they are. So I don't know. All I know is that I try to listen to what sounds best, turning them on and off. And lately on the bass guitar, transient on, burn off, sounds good. So let's listen again to what this is doing. And as you can see, I've got my gain pulled up just a little bit just to gain match it, so we're not losing too much. And all we're doing here is just kind of gluing itself together a little bit more, keeping those guitar picks, those hits sustained as well as kind of consistent. And that's it. Now let's listen to that with the drums. Cool. Sounds great. Okay, let's move on to electric guitars. So we had 2 electric guitars for this session, and we actually had them both running in stereo through Line 6 Helix stomp pedals. So they're both running dual amp Sims, where they have 2 different amps, one on each side. So it's stereo left and right. There's a little bit difference between the two of them. And we have the option to pan them depending on what we need. And Yeah, they sound great. So let's listen to the first one here. All right, we've already got a great starting point here, so let's take a look at what we can do better. So what all I've done here is, I'm going to bring up the EQ. I'm going to high pass it, because you're always going to high pass guitars. High passing guitars at about 100 hertz in this case, just because I don't need any of the information going to my subs. And then you'll see here I've got some EQ that's going to come in. We're going to dip some of the 200 to 400s out, and then we're going to actually start cutting out some of the high-end information because we don't need it to be super sparkly. We want to leave room for clarity for other things like vocals. So let's listen to what this sounds like before and after. High pass filter. Cut that rumble out. Now, you may be going, well, CJ, that seems like you just kind of lost some of your clarity in your electric. Yes, we did lose a little bit of it, but in the context of our mix, we really don't need it because it's not going to be heard compared to things like the vocals that need that extra air on the 10K and up. So it's okay to lose some of the information. I know it sounds weird by itself, but I'm telling you, if you were to bring that out and bring that cut up, you would have it kind of stomping over your vocals and have issues with clarity. So that's that one guitar. Let's look at the compressor real fast on it. I do have, yes, yet again, 1176 on this one. We've got medium to high attack. We've got it just cutting out about 4 dB on the ratio setting. And then we've got a slower release. And that's just because guitars have a little bit more sustain to them naturally. So we don't need it to release as quickly. Let's take a listen to it before. This is a subtle effect here, and this is kind of similar to the bass in that we're just kind of gluing those strums together, and we're just kind of keeping it tight. I know the guitar player already has compression on their side because they're running a compressor pedal. Both of them actually are, and that's going to get the notes of the individual strings together for them, and that's going to get them, as they go into the rest of their effects chain because they've got it up front, that's going to get the tightness and consistency of the notes together, but I want the tonality of the whole sound from with the reverb and delay and everything to all be put together as one. So that's what that compressor is doing. Okay, let's listen to our other electric. Kind of a similar sound here. So we're going to give similar treatment. We're going to pop in that EQ. Take a listen now. And I'm actually going to go ahead and grab a little bit more of that low mid out. Just to clean it up. All right, moving on, we're going to go to the compressor. Same thing again here. Just tightening it up as a sound overall. Okay, so now we've got both the guitars. Now, they technically are both stereo, so they have sounds that are going to be a little bit different for left speakers and right speakers, but I have two guitar players that I got to deal with, and I've got to make space for other things like my vocals, my kick, my snare. And one of the easiest ways I can do that is by moving the guitars a little bit out towards from the center and let the center be my main spot for my vocals. Now, we're getting into the issue of, well, what if you're on one side of the room versus the other? I can't control where everyone stands in the perfect spot. All I can do is get a good mix for what I know works in my room, from where I'm standing, and from where I could be in the PA. So to me, it makes sense to get it to sound as good as possible for that main spot, knowing that the rest of the room is going to hear what they need to hear. And if someone really cares about their sound quality experience, they're probably going to go stand in front of a speaker or where they need to be because they know what they need to do. But we're not getting to a point where we're losing so much information that you can't have a good worship experience because you can't hear the one guitar part from one side of the room to the other. We're not worried about that because we're also not hard panning here. So let's listen to what these guitars sound like together, both with their signals straight up down the middle with their stereo guitars going left and right, and then we'll pan them out. All right, we'll pan left on the first one, just enough. bringing down the electric one just a little bit to even them out. All right, let's bring in the drums and the bass. Okay, we're getting somewhere. Now let's bring in the acoustics. So we'll mute all this. Let's listen to our acoustic. Now, acoustics, I can't stress enough how important it is to have a good sounding acoustic up front. Get a good acoustic guitar for your worship leader or whoever's playing it, and you'll have your day set for you because you don't have to do anything. Acoustics rely so much on being good from the source. Like, you can't fix a bad sounding acoustic at front of house. So this goes back to the conversation of a $1,000 guitar with a $1 mic. You can make a $1,000 guitar sound good with a $1 mic, but you can't do the opposite. So in this case here, we had a really great sounding acoustic to start off with. In fact, let's take a listen. All right, so it sounds great already. We'll bring in a EQ and a high pass filter. All we're doing here is cutting off some of the low information from 200 hertz below because we don't need that going to our subs. I'm going to keep harping on that. You don't need to go to your subs. Just high pass it. And then I've got some dips just to kind of shape things. And I've actually brought some of the brightness down overall from almost 2K over. So let's just listen to what it sounds like now. Before, after. Okay, so let's talk about compression real fast for acoustics. Now, I find that compression is really, really critical for a full band context on acoustic, especially getting it to where you're kind of squashing it a little bit because I want to hear more of the jingle and chime of the acoustic and less of the actual note sustain because everybody else is covering that. But if it's just the acoustic by themselves, especially if it's the whole set, I'm probably not going to compress it nearly as much. So let's listen to what this sounds like before and after with the compressor, and then we'll talk about what we're doing. Okay, so what are we doing here? We're compressing a lot here by actually a 4-to-1 ratio. We've got the attack set at max, so that way it's grabbing those initial strums. The recovery's at medium, so it's not letting it go too quickly, but we're hearing quite a bit of the sustain of it naturally. And then as you saw, I've got the transient burn turned on this one. That just sounded great. Again, I don't know what those buttons do. I just know they sound good in this context. So there may be a manual out there by the time this has been posted that tells you exactly what they are, and hopefully they do that. But for now, we don't know. Anyway, so let's understand what we're trying to accomplish here with this acoustic and the compression is that I'm trying to kind of glue all the strums together so that way they sound more like a shaker in some ways. I'm just wanting to use it for that sound, less of the actual tonality and less of the actual like notes, more of that. But however, when the person plays really hard and they dig in, it's going to keep it at the same volume as if they were picking like softly because you're going to have that compressor pulling it back heavily to match that same level. So then when it goes down to a soft moment and the acoustic guitar player plays and they're playing softly, we can hear what they're doing and it's going to sound beautiful. So let's listen again what we're doing. And I'm really aggressive here. I mean, I'm doing almost 10 dB of reduction. That's a lot. So that's our acoustic. Let's bring it in contact with everything else. And here's just the guitars without any of the drums. Okay, that's all the guitars there. We're going to move on to the next video where we talk about keys and pads. Let's get to it.